So I was working on cutting down my slides and cutting down to try to make sure that we get through everything today, because the problem with giving the last tutorial of a series is that there's not another day to push things off onto. So I'm happy to take questions, but I'm going to try to, I have 35 slides. I'm going to try to get through all of them, because what I'm trying to do in the lecture today, as I have been sort of over the course of the tutorials, is to give you what I see as some really kind of key studies in animal cognition that illustrate different kind of big picture questions or methods or major findings that a lot of other people reference and discuss, so that we can have some common vocabulary and some, sort of common history of ideas within the space. Today, I'm going to throw in some of my own work, not because I'm like, this is a foundational paper everyone should read, but because I'm mostly going to talk about social cognition today, which happens to be the area that I specialize in. So I'd like to start out by finishing a couple of thoughts on methods for studying animal cognition broadly. And we talked a lot about kind of experimental designs and setting up control conditions. We haven't talked a lot about different methods for measuring, for taking measurements during studies. So we've been mostly talking about like externally observable actions. Does an animal turn to the right or the left? Can they find their way through the maze? Do they choose to ask for food from experimenter 1 or 2? But I'd just like to point out that there are a huge number of externally measurable biometrics. So, I know we've had some nice discussion about neuroscience and different kinds of measurements that you can take internally. There are also a lot of biometric measures that you can take externally. So this is from a study that I did looking at skin temperature as a measure of arousal. So this is a bonobo, and he is watching someone else be tickled. And I have a grant right now on, and this is like you're just like, really? You're like tickling apes and like videotaping them? Yes, that is my life. So what we were doing in this study was trying to determine whether states of arousal associated with positive affect were different when you were experiencing something from a first person or third person standpoint. So are you being tickled yourself? Are you watching someone else be tickled? And so we contrasted tickling and grooming. And what we're looking at here, so this is a thermal camera, and what we're looking at is nasal temperature. And what you see here is his nose is getting colder as he's watching, which indicates that the blood is being drawn in from extremities, which is a sign of arousal. So you can measure things about blood flow changes by looking at external skin temperature changes. You can also do this by doing hyperspectral imaging. One of our colleagues, past colleagues at UCLA, Mike Alfaro, is using that in fish, which is really cool. So there are all sorts of things that you can get, different kinds of measures with various degrees of training. Some things like thermal imaging require no training. The animal just has to be a set distance and can't be behind glass or plexiglass. So you have to have a clear shot. Jacob, did you have a question?
I was just wondering if you should clarify what arousal means when you talk about an animal being aroused.
Yes, I mean, not like sexy arousal. Was that? Yes. So yes, we weren't like, I was watching someone get tickled. Yeah, that seems, I should talk about, yes. Anyway, what we're really looking at is like blood flow changes and changes in kind of the like state of like readiness, excitation of the body, which can be associated with fear, they can be associated with excitement, they can be associated with sexual excitement. That is not the case here. There are other externally visible cues, particularly with male bonobos, that you could use to assess that, which were absent in this particular study. So we determined it was not that type of arousal. Okay, was that helpful? Great. Okay, so I want to just have one last thought on human bias, or this sort of human biases. is that, in saying sort of a fairly obvious statement, which is that our implicit theoretical models, well, either implicit or explicit, constrain the questions we ask, right? They constrain the methods we use, they constrain the conclusions that we draw, but I think importantly, they can really constrain the types of questions we ask in the first place. And they can do that unconsciously, right? They can do that without us being aware of that, right? Where we say, like, is this a good question? And I just want to highlight this in one area because it leads into something I'm particularly interested in working on, and I hope that some of you might also be interested in talking with me about these things. So this is the model that underlies most research in animal communication. And so this is built out of the Shannon information model of communication. And it sort of combines that with a conduit metaphor and basically sort of builds out into what some people call the code model of communication, right? In which one individual has a message they want to communicate, they use some type of encoder, right? Some type of, I have something I want, I stick it into a code in some way, I transmit it across a communicative channel, some noise can perturbate that channel, which could be literal noise, or could be, there's visual interference, or there's, something else going on, but something sort of can intercept, and then the receiver receives whatever package of communicative stuff is sent, but then they have to decode it, right? And so what I think is nice about this model is it has these different opportunities for miscommunication, right? You can encode something in a way that mismatches with the way someone else decodes it. You can send it in a way where the thing that is being sent is degraded in some way. But this model was built, as a model of information transfer, but for electronic signals, right? And I think it fits very nicely for something like, radio signals or, electronic signals through a network. But it's very limited when it comes to the ways in which people, certainly, and I would argue animals, communicate with one another, right? It's this one-way process. It lacks any sort of channels or signals or information for making inferences about intent or goal. It lacks kind of an opportunity for real-time modification. And compare this, this very simple model to something which, this is just like my attempt to make a very simplified model of human language. I'm not saying that this accounts for human language, but just as a contrast, right? To say that there are all of these different, both sort of conventional codes and non-codes, things that are contextually situated. People are making inference about the other person's ideas, knowledge, and intent. And so when people draw conclusions about animal communication is a simple series of exchanging codes, and human communication is a rich inferential system that is built on theory of mind, we're not asking questions in a way that actually allow for a fair comparison. That doesn't mean that this model is inherently wrong. It doesn't mean that it can't be useful, but it is not equitable. And what I would really like to do, I'm just starting out because I didn't know if I was going to get to the end of my talk. So I'm starting out with some possible dream projects. One of them would be to expand the Shannon information model to create a sort of intermediate model of communication, which might account for some of the inferences that animals make without going to the full complexity of human language. So this is something I'm very interested in. If you are also interested in thinking about it, talking about it, come chat with me. And then
an example just to illustrate what you mean by this.
Yeah, so I mean sort of, taking like this kind of model and adding in, which like is a mathematical model, and adding in some, ability for this system to be modulated by, say, past interactions or inference about, the signaler is changing the way they encode based on the external environment or based on who they're communicating with. All of those things are not built into this model. And so I think that taking this and trying to use some of the data from animal communication studies that say, here are the ways in which we know animals can modulate the way they communicate based on what I know the other one knows or doesn't know.
Ms. Maybe I was asking, can you just give an example of a communication that doesn't fit into this?
Oh, sure. Using common ground. So, if there's, I'll actually have some slides with some examples we can walk through. But, if, this bird has, is communicating, Fred is communicating to Larry, and Fred has past interactions with Larry in which, he and Larry either were co-present at an event or not. He knows that Larry is aware that Fred has this other territory, right? And there is good evidence for that kind of information where, I'm associating another piece of information with, with interlocutor A versus B, and it kind of, you can incorporate, you're changing the way you communicate, basically. And so this very simple model was proposed and has been adopted in animal communication in order to demonstrate that animal communication has meaning, right? And so you want to be able to say, look, if I take this signal out of the context, right, I record a vocalization and I play it back in context that is completely devoid of any contextual cues, animals can still respond to it. And I think that was a really important step in illustrating that, yes, animal calls, are not just responses to the environment. They themselves carry, referential meaning. However, we haven't then taken the step back to say they aren't just context free, right? And I think we have done that step with human language, where yes, we can, you can have a sentence that's written out and given to someone in a different context, and it has some meaning, but to really understand the full richness of that, of intention, of the pragmatics, it can be modulated and embedded and inflected by contextual information and relationship information. And I think that's what's really hasn't been, has been done for human language and hasn't really been done for animal communication. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Well, and just, building on that point, I think it's also the case that when you use the sorts of methods that people have developed for animal communication based on this very simplistic picture to then study human communication, it looks a lot more like animal communication than, we actually think it does. So there's evidence that this model is driving methodological approaches that are pushing ahead.
Right. Yeah.
For the examples that you provided, would it be sufficient to add a sequence of interactions and some memory?
I don't know. That's the kind of thing I would love to explore.
The channel doesn't have to be memoryless, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it'd be really interesting. I think for some kinds of things, like that example, adding, having memory that can be linked to individual recognition, maybe that is sufficient for certain kinds of things. I think it might not be sufficient for other kinds of things. But I think exploring that is exactly the kind of thing I would be really interested in doing. I am not a mathematician. That will not shock anyone in this room. But I do, but that's the kind of thing where I would really hope that people who have those formal skills could say, well, here would be my approach, and then I could bring the content knowledge and say, well, here's an example that I don't know, would that fit, right? Yeah, so most of my data is with ape communication, and so it's yes, I do have some data. It might not be, we might want to have some like intermediately complicated data, which we could pull from other things. But yes, okay. So that's possible dream project number 1, and then possible dream project number 2, we talked about a little bit yesterday, which is just kind of using some of the methods and guidelines from animal cognition to build and inform new methods for assessing understanding in AI, which is something I'm very interested in. Okay, so yes, coming back to this physical versus social cognition, I just really love these things. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about physical cognition, and then we'll spend the rest of the talk on social cognition. And with a question, so this is a question that I worked on, is looking at the domain specificity of physical cognition. And so I'm just going to walk you through a study that I ran on with collaborators on Darwin's finches in the Galapagos, because it's like one thing where I sound like a real biologist, and I'm like, oh yes, when I was in the Galapagos. Otherwise, I'm like not a real biologist. So we were comparing woodpecker finches here on the left, who are tool-using birds, and small tree finches here on the right, who are closely related but do not use tools. And this is an interesting question because it's really been proposed as that tool use, in particular, has been proposed as a driver of human cognitive evolution, right? That sort of when humans started to use tools, that there then were kind of explosions in what people sometimes refer to as general or domain general cognition, associated with an explosion in art, in ritual, in many other kinds of things, and as the tools also got more complex. And so one question is the tool use, is specialization for tool use driving an improvement in other forms of cognition? And this is really impossible to ask from human ancestors. It's also almost impossible to ask in close human relatives, extant primates, so the great apes, because there just are not enough examples. There's not enough variation. So you have to do kind of a farther comparison to look for tool use within a group of species who are closely related to one another but have variation in tool use. And so this has been one of the questions that that my colleague Sabina Tebish has been working on, and I had a chance to go collaborate with them on a project. So in this project, we used the woodpecker finches and small tree finches, and we gave them 3 different types of tasks. One was a physical task that closely resembled tool use. So this is what's called a trap tube task. And so you'll see here, these are little pits, and they're either functional traps where the stopper is at the bottom, or they're non-functional traps where the stopper is at the top, right? And there is this little bar and a disc on either side of a food reward. So what the bird has to do is, this is a clear tube, the bird hops around, looks at different sides, and they have to figure out where there is surface continuity so that they pull to the correct side. So if they pull this or they push this, right, if they're moving the food this way, then they'll get it. If they move the food this way, the food falls into the trap and is inaccessible. And this task very closely physically resembles the tool use that they have evolved to do, they're doing in the wild, right? They take these little sticks, they poke them into holes to get caterpillars and other insects. So we have a physical cognition task where surface continuity is critical to success in the task, assessing that continuity. And it is physically very similar to the types of actions that they produce in their natural tool use behavior. So we wanted to then develop a type of task that also relied on surface continuity but didn't have the same action patterns, right? So they weren't sticking a stick into a hole and pushing and pulling it. So we took the same idea of different traps, And we turned it into a seesaw. So here, which is a very physically unnatural thing. I mean, birds obviously perch on things, but that's not how they forage. And so in this task, we had a series, again, of sort of inserts like this, where there were holes on different sides, and the bird just has to decide. It's a two-choice task. Decide which side to jump on, and the food rolls down. This was pretty gross. We had to take mealworms and cut up little pieces and stick them into tiny little tubes that would roll down. It was very finicky. There were a lot of worms stuffed into tubes. Anyway, so this is the physical task, but did not resemble tool use. And then we tried to give them a more general cognition task. So we gave them a reversal learning task. And so in this task, which has been proposed as a fairly general task, you train an animal that you give them a pair of stimuli, and you train them that one is always rewarded. So blue might be rewarded, and you pair blue with different colors, and they're like blue, 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 great. And then at some point, once they've learned that and they're consistently choosing blue, you swap the color that's rewarded. And the question is, how quickly do they change the rule that they've learned? Right? And so this it comes back to this implicit explicit, right? So that if they are capable of rule learning and switching their rule, you should have this relatively quick inflection where they go from 90% accurate choosing blue, you switch the reward, they'll crash for one or two trials, and then go back to 90%, but choosing the other color. And so what we found in comparing woodpecker finches and small tree finches is that the finches were very good at the task that most closely resembled tools, and they were okay, but not significantly better at the physical task that did not resemble tools. And that they were significantly worse at the task that was general rule learning. So the small tree finches, which are generalist foragers, who have to switch, are switching foods more seasonally. They don't, they haven't evolved this special behavior for specializing on a particular type of food. They seem to have more flexible cognition. So although they lack the ability to use tools, something that in humans we associate with very advanced cognition, they are better at more flexible rule learning. And so that's a really interesting comparison where it seems like specialization for tool use makes you very good at tool use if you're a woodpecker finch, but it doesn't necessarily make you good at other kinds of cognitive tasks. Yeah?
So in the first two things, this pushing-pulling task or the seesaw task, you could imagine that what they learn is not the question of continuity, but the question that one side is marked in some way, and so that they have to land on the unmarked side or something like this. To interpret that trap as a mark simply. So how does their learning on that compare to the more abstract learning of yellow versus blue? Which you could imagine you could have equally well marked one side with blue and the other with yellow, and you could have told them to land always on the blue.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I do think that there's...
That is, the question is, do they think of this as a kind of an abstract learning task without any further contextual clues, or do they think of it as, this is a continuity test which have some specificity for, And
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going, I think of it as a continuity task, but I do think that this is a familiar kind of task if you're a bird that uses tools. You can give them, these types of tasks have been used across a huge number of tool-using species, and you can give them to them pre-baited like this, where they just have to push or pull. You can give them to them with, just an open tube, and they have to choose a tool and use it, or make a tool and use it, or use a tool to open a box to get a tool to use it. There are all of these and then variations. And I do think that basically, when there's something out of reach, you kind of kick into that module that has evolved for accessing things out of reach. woodpecker finches, will pick up things and spontaneously poke at stuff all the time. And so I do think that that's a
different part of the task. One is just to learn how to manipulate this tube, which you could imagine, yes, knowing that a stick means push-pull.
Yeah.
But the second one is to decide which way to go, right? And that could be simply learning that, it kind of looks more black on one side than the other. And black is good to push and white is good to pull.
That is true. So we didn't run an opaque variation. People have done that, where you have an opaque tube, where you then wouldn't be able to assess these cues. And there are variations where you mark the tube in different ways. I don't know, because I don't think it's been done in this species, so I don't know how that would work. But it is a great point, is that, yes, this looks like a physical task, but if you collapse it, it really, is this like, what are they picking up on? And there are, I'm happy to post some papers. There are people who have run control tasks to see kind of whether turning this into this kind of thing impairs performance. And I believe that it does, but since I'm being recorded, I'm going to hedge and say I will post some papers. I really also think it depends a lot on the species and on the particular affordances of a task. Yeah.
Is there a sense that maybe there's a hidden assumption here that all tool using is the same? I'm thinking about a gorilla putting a stick in water to test the depth or whatever.
Yeah.
Versus a chimp sticking a stick in a tree to get a bush baby. Those seem like two different tasks. And maybe there's some kind of covariance with something like extractive foraging, like you see in capuchins, octopus, and eyes, right? Which you wouldn't say are necessarily tool users,
right,
but have something else.
That have a built-in thing where you're it resembles tool use, but it's part of your body, and so to what extent, and certainly you can do, imaging studies with humans that show that even when you have a tool that's detached from your body, if you, have become, if you have a lot of experience using it, you start to represent it as part of your body. So then it kind of breaks down this external, internal tool question. So absolutely. And there are some people who have, I think, nicely kind of broken up this monolith of tool use into what kind of tool, what kind of action, what kind, is this, how much flexibility do you have, what thing are you foraging for, tools that are for extractive foraging versus, making a rain hat, other kinds of things. So yes, absolutely, I think those are all really great questions, and that is, I'm happy to point folks towards some papers that I think try to take a step in the direction of sort of breaking apart and systematizing tool use. Okay, so mostly I just wanted to show you some fun birds. I want to just connect to a project that I'm working on right now with Josh Tenenbaum, Kelsey Allen, Kevin Smith, and my postdoc, Don Lamiris, which is that we're trying to use a virtual tools platform to assess and more accurately measure strategies during tool use in non-human animals. And so they have this beautiful platform. You can check it out here. You can play around with it. They've developed this for use in humans and have built this beautiful model to explain it and compare it to machine learning algorithms. And in this task, you are presented here with this image, this sort of virtual world. You have to choose a tool here on the right, you selected this one, and then you place it somewhere in the world, and as soon as you place it, the physics engine turns on, the tool falls, it interacts with other things in the environment, and your goal is to get the red ball into the green goal, right? And so it's kind of like an iPhone game. I'm sure we've all played things like that. And so human performance on this task is characterized by these sort of aha moments of insight where you get these clear jumps in performance. There are structured object-oriented initial attempts and few-shot trial and error learning. And so the question that we're interested in now is what about other animals? And so we're testing bonobos. This is not a bonobo, this is a chimpanzee. It's from the other study. I just don't have a nice photo from our study. So we're testing bonobos, close relative of chimpanzees and us, at Plankendel Zoo in Belgium. We have, right now, this is in progress, so I don't have real data to show you. I just want to tell you that we have 6 to 8 who have passed the initial training phase where we're progressively lowering the probability of random success. So, this would be an example where in this you choose a tool and then you have to drop it here, right, in order for it to be successful, right? If you drop it here, the tool falls into the green goal, it doesn't make contact, and if you drop it here, it's like a trap tube task. And so what we've done is we've started by training them on things where they're 100% successful and lowered it to 90 and lowered it to 60 and lowered it to 40. And right now we have 6 to 8 bonobos who are hopefully 8 by the end of this week, past 40%. And now we're testing them on near and far transfer tasks. So if we train them on something like this, we might test them on something like this, where they have, where the idea of there's a trap is still the same, but the layout of where they can place the object is quite different. And there are sort of the no place zones here in the dark gray are also quite different. So like visually the tasks are quite different, and we're trying to figure out both how they do on their first attempt, but then also if they're given multiple attempts to correct, how are they strategizing, how are they sampling the environment. And so we're testing bonobos, they've tested adults, also gonna test kids. And we're working with Irene Pepperberg's lab in Boston to test parrots. We might test monkeys, but we're not there yet. This is just the vision. Yeah?
What are they doing? Are they pushing buttons or something? Or?
It's a touch screen. So, so like basically ignore B and C, so they would see this. It's touch screen. They have to select an object, so they just tap it, and then they tap where they want it to go in the environment. And as soon as they place it, then the physics turns on, gravity happens, and then they sort of wait until the red ball has come to a stop, and then they're either rewarded or not. Okay, any other questions about that? Cool. Okay, so Josh's lab has developed this sample simulate update model, SUP model. I did not do this, so please don't ask me technical questions about it. But this is the model that they're using to model the human decision, human trial and error learning in this. And they found that this SUP model is pretty good at emulating the ways in which, the sort of speed with which humans can pass this task. And what we're interested in is generating data from other animals to see whether they have different strategies and whether we can model those, and in what ways the model, the SUP model would be changed in order to better match the learning strategies and the sort of environmental sampling strategies of different species. So we have a virtual tools working group where we meet over Zoom on Monday afternoons. If anyone is interested in coming in any of these problems, I would invite you to join us. So, okay. I would like to take the rest of the time to talk about social cognition. And I'm just going to go through pretty quickly some why is social cognition interesting? Because hopefully you agree with me that it is. So I think social cognition is a really excellent area to look for evidence of mental representation in animals. They have to make predictions based on non-visible information. You can ask questions non-verbally. There's a broad distribution of social behaviors across species. These are ecologically relevant questions. It's something that you can also study developmentally in humans, and it ranges from very simple kinds of problems to very complicated problems. So, can I mate with you? Are you going to eat me? Moving into things that have multiple layers of intentionality, right? I recognize that you're doing X because you want me to learn Y, and infer that you know Z, right? So and so you can really think about sort of building up the complexity. So, animals, yeah, I just really like that. So, depending on the species and sort of the level of sociality and the type of social structure, you might want to, when I say you want to, I just mean the species might have been selected to have abilities that would allow them to identify members of their own species, identify individuals they're closely related to, distinguish between potential mates, recognize allies and partners, avoid conflict or initiate conflict, and rise to power. So most species have some degree of individual recognition, but they use very different modalities and sources of information to make those judgments. So I'm going to walk you through one study that I think nicely demonstrates this with birdsong. There's also evidence for individual recognition in pheromones, in facial markings, in movement. Other types of information can be used for assessing who an individual is. And it does require some type of memory and some type of, I would argue, some type of model or representation of individuals. So this is a classic study from the 90s here with song sparrows. And they're using the fact that song sparrows have fairly stable territories, and they're fairly small, as a way to assess what their expectations about other individuals and where other individuals should be. So let's take this male here. This is his territory. And his territory is bordered by 3 other males in their territories. So in this study, they took just this one male here and then played back that male's song, either from his territory, where he should be, right, where the target male is used to hearing him, or they played back the song of an unknown individual. So same species, but one they'd never encountered before. And then they kept those that same comparison, but played them back from 2 different locations. Oh yeah, sorry. The thing that they're looking at, the outcome variable, is the calling rate. So you hear the song and you're interested in how much does the bird respond with their own territorial song. So you can gloss it as a get off my lawn. Then they played the songs back from in the middle of that male's territory and from the opposite side. And what they found was that, so this is just response strength. So calling, it's, transformed, but calling rate. What they found was that when the male is played, when the known male is played back from their expected location, the calling rate is lower, right? I know that that's where Larry is. Larry knows where I am. This is not weird. I don't need to sort of put a lot of effort into defending my territory. When an unknown male is played back from Larry's territory, there's a lot of, the male responds with a lot of calling. When anyone is in your territory, it's weird, it is unexpected, and you have a strong response. And then what's really interesting, I think, is it's not just about territorial defense, because when you move either Larry, the known male, or the unknown male to the other side, they're integrating information about individual and about where that individual should be, or is normally. Right? And so they're integrating individual and location information such that they're responding the same amount to a known male and an unknown male, but from an unusual location. So I just think this is a nice kind of study. Okay. Any questions about that before I move on? Cool. I had to have one insect paper in my talk. So we're talking about individual recognition earlier in the week. And so there is just nice evidence across animal species that some species have very good individual facial recognition for individuals in their species. So this is true for, obviously for humans, it's true for great apes, it's true for sheep. There was a beautiful study with sheep. And there's a really nice study in these paper wasps that shows that they are better at discriminating faces of individuals for their own species than they are in a closely related species, or faces of their own species, but where those faces have been rearranged or had the antennas removed, or even things that visually they should be able to distinguish, right? These are much more different visually, but they're worse at distinguishing between patterns, abstract patterns, than they are faces of conspecific individuals. Yeah, Cody.
Well, why do they have this? Like, I imagine I would index faces to know who's going to defect against me or something in the future, or who I need to work with on some specific task. Why would wasps want to remember who they're looking at?
That's a great question. Luke, you have any information about bees?
I honestly am not sure.
I'm not.
The only
Luke
thing
is our
that-
insect guy.
The only thing that I remembered when you mentioned this paper is that I met the person who did it.
Oh,
And
cool.
She was actually allergic to wasps.
Oh.
But yeah, I don't know, which was a big problem for her research. But as you can imagine. But no, I have no idea why.
Yeah, I also don't know why, but some species. So this Fuscatus is very good at recognizing, at discriminating between individuals. This closely related species cannot do it. And so, I think it's a great question. I do not know enough about the socioecology of the wasps to know why they would have been selected for. I know sheep are better at recognizing sheep faces than goat faces, those kinds of things. And so you do see variation across animals. Mostly, I just think it's really interesting that it seems to be, have been selected for conspecifics. This species does. Thank you for Googling. Jacob says this species, unlike the other one, has a dominance hierarchy. So you do want to know where you stand. Great. Yeah.
How many, is it color cones? How many color cones do they have in their eyes?
I do not know. Yes. Sorry.
The reason why I ask is because maybe they have extra colors that we're not able to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, but you would assume that if they're using those extra colors, that rearranging those stimuli, you're taking the same images and you're just removing the antenna, or you're taking the same images but scrambling them, that they would have the same, these rearranged faces should contain the same amount of information, even if they have colors that we don't have. And the fact that they're still showing significant performance impairment on the rearranged faces.
The rearranged faces are pictures.
They're all pictures.
And so, what if they physically have something on them that we can't capture in, with three color cones?
Sure, but when they're being tested on pictures of, right, so.
They're able to do their picture.
Yes, yeah. So they're just being shown, and this is just a simple, just like the reversal learning, like they have, they would give this pair of faces, and in this task, actually, it's a maze that's electrified, and there's one safe space, and they have to learn which face to go to get off the electric floor, and so they can do that much faster with faces of animals of the same wasps of the same species that are in their sort of natural configuration. Yeah, so they're all photographs. Yeah, did you have?
That's it. I was just wondering how you check whether they know that they're different or not. So your shock task. They have to, okay. Always a shock task.
Yeah, it could be. So there are studies, not I think with facial recognition, but there's some similar studies like in honeybees where it doesn't have to be a negative stimulus. It can be go this way to find the sugar water. Just in this one, the maze was slightly electrocuted. Do you have?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it's cool that this is visual recognition, but in like a lot of social insects, they can recognize each other, and definitely separate colonies by smell.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they detect different smells and they'll just fight each other. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How good are like humans and like children especially at like rearranged faces or something like that? Like, are we really good at it or?
No. I mean, we're better at, I think so we definitely show a significant decrease if you take a face and you scramble it. And again, it's that whole idea that like the same information is there, the same amount of information. But you can also sort of, I don't have a piece of chalk. If you take newborn infants and you're just looking at their response, human infants, and you're looking at their response to sort of like their face response. Like, do they orient? Do they suckle longer if they're looking at something that looks like a face or not? They respond more strongly to what sometimes is called like a super stimulus, which like they respond more strongly to something that looks like this than an actual human face. So it's like 2 dots and 1 dot. And they respond like more strongly to that than to this, and more strongly than to like 1 dot, and so there does seem like there's something about this like orientation that is very sort of low-level visual processing, like from birth. Yeah.
Can you please explain a bit more why you think that they failed at the patterns task?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I don't think I actually have the graphs. I mean, they didn't fail. They're better than chance. So they do learn it. It's just that they are faster at learning the faces. And so, I think you could think about it, in the same way. So in some of the examples from earlier talks this week, we've seen things like information that is embedded within a story, right? And so it's like, this is an abstract math problem, but if you turn it into like a narrative and it becomes more relevant, you remember it better. Or you can, make judgments about it, or you can make, more rational judgments or more accurate judgments than you can if the information is abstracted. And I think that's basically what's going on here, right? That like this is information that's being presented in a way that is ecologically relevant to this species, right? That knowing whether like this individual can beat you up or not is something that these species evolved to do. Differentiating between these is something they can do, but it doesn't sort of have that same immediacy or that relevance. And so I would think about it more as kind of taking information and contextualizing it in a way that makes it either faster to process or easier to remember, or connected in some way to other sources of information in your world. Does that help? Awesome. Okay. Yeah.
I wonder what happened. Have you also tried to kind of do this experiment, but just maybe use black and white color, black and white images?
I think people have done. I mean, I do not do these experiments, so. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea behind using black and white patterns. I believe, and I think, in something like, okay, these caterpillars have similar colors to the wasps, but, are quite physically different. I think you could take the same patterns and like make them wasp colors. I don't know for this species how that would change their performance. And those are exactly the kinds of controls that you would want to run, though, right? Is to say, okay, if I take an abstract pattern, but I put it into more ecologically relevant colors, or, like perfectly straight lines like don't really exist that much in their world. So what if you take an abstract pattern, but you make it waspier, make it curvier, make it something. Would they be better? Because like this is much simpler. Like this should be an easier task, right? But it's harder for them. And so yeah, I think those are great questions. I do not know whether they have run that study, but I think that's the kind of experiment you would want to run. Okay. Yeah? I am looking at the clock. I'm just going to, all right. I'm going to not walk through, but just sort of give you a couple of other topics, and then I want to walk through another study in more detail. So these are just some other things, some other areas of work that people are interested in when it comes to recognizing others and information about others. So there's sort of a distinction between the ability to detect gaze and the ability to follow gaze. And I'm happy to talk more in detail about these studies offline, but simply to say that broadly across the animal kingdom, there is very wide use of the perception of, is someone else looking at me, right? So is a predator looking at me? Can the prey see me? There's a great study with seagulls that shows that they will steal people's food more readily if the person is not directly looking at the food. So just some like beautiful things. You could do them on here on campus. I'm going to come back to a study, if I get to it at the end, about food caching in birds that shows that they're sensitive not just to whether they're being watched by someone else, but that individuals who have past experience stealing from other individuals are more likely to recache their food if someone's watching them. So if you yourself have stolen, you are more afraid of being stolen from. So there's some really nice studies that show that animals can integrate their own experience into their predictions of others' behavior. Okay, so gaze detection versus gaze following. There's a whole bunch of work on goal detection, anticipation of actions. This is actually a study from human infants, but there have been similar things in different animals looking at where do you expect someone to move, what do you expect someone to choose, and this is just, I thought might be interesting for folks here, looking at human infants differentiating between biologically agentive action and action of a mechanical claw. And they will predictively, they will integrate the individual's preferences. So if you see a human's hand reaching for and consistently selecting one of two objects, you infer, infants before a year old will infer that biological agent has a preference, but they won't make that same attribution for robot arm, at least in 2012. And so I do think it is very relevant. People are redoing these kinds of studies now, thinking about agentive behavior in robots. Yeah.
How do you infer that from them? They're
So-
very young, right?
They're looking at, so this is eye tracking, they're looking at like predictive looking. And so if you sort of show consistent reaches, so the infant is seeing video, and you see the human hand reaches for the ball instead of the frog, they reach for the ball, they switch places, the human reaches for the ball, they switch places, human reaches for the ball, they switch places. And then you show them a video where the human's hand just extends out into the middle. And then you see, does the infant sort of look at the ball, or does the infant just look at the thing that's moving? And so when they have the hand, they are anticipating that the hand will move towards the thing that it has chosen, but they won't make the same sort of goal-based assumption for the non-biological agent. Okay. I think I want to just talk about this for a second, because I think that this is moving from representing things to representing relationships between things. In fact, abstract or invisible relationships. And this is something that social animals can do, something that most of the studies have been tested in animals that have strict social hierarchies. But I think that is not because other animals don't have those abilities, it's just because it's easier to test. So we have to think about, sort of be inventive in finding new ways. So this is a lovely study in vervet monkeys, kind of a classic study from the 80s, where I think it nicely demonstrates that monkeys have an understanding of familial relationships between other individuals. So let's say you have 3 female monkeys, A, B, and C, and each of them has an infant. And then you wait until all their infants are out of view. And so these studies can take years to run because you have to wait for exactly the right configuration, right? So the 3 females are sitting here, their infants disappear, and then you play back a scream of A's infant, right? So you have a speaker hidden behind a tree or a bush, and you play a scream from the infant. And then B and C, females B and C, look at female A, right? And so, it's like, hey, they don't look at the sound, they look away from the sound towards the mother of the individual who's screaming. And then the mother of the individual who's screaming approaches the speaker. I think this is a really simple but really elegant design that shows that they have an understanding of some kind of association, some kind of relationship between A and I was going to say A prime, A's infant. And there are lots of different kinds of studies that show that animals, at least social animals, can have these types of understandings.
Can I?
Yeah.
I was wondering, do humans do the same? I feel like I can't distinguish between when my kids scream and some other. I always look and see if it's my kids that scream. So I feel like do humans really do this?
I mean, I think probably not humans living in big metropolitan areas, but humans living in a small village where there are 6 infants. And you hear them constantly. Humans can identify their own infant versus other infants. Yeah.
By the sound of their scream. So it's just me that.
I mean, I think, and this is a great question of sort of implicit, explicit knowledge. I bet that you are better than chance if we were to record your baby crying and someone else's baby. You would hear it and go, oh, of course. I might not think that I can recognize, Mark by his footsteps, but I bet that I'm a lot better than chance, right? And so I think that that's the kind of thing where, if you have enough, and maybe by the end of the 3 months, I'll be able to recognize everyone by your footsteps, but I'm I feel like I have an intuition that I can definitely recognize Jacob by his footsteps because I hear them a lot. Mark, I hear them somewhat, but not as much. And you all, I'm getting to hear. And so I think that that's the kind of thing that you probably are much better than you think you are. Okay, I'm going to, so just talk about intentions for a second. And then I want to talk, I'm going to talk about this. Okay, so I think this is another nice example of potentially having internal models of other agents. So this is a study, again, a kind of classic study. This is from the early 2000s, where chimpanzees were asked to distinguish between between experimenters who were unable to provide them with a reward versus experimenters who were unwilling to provide them with a reward. And so there are many different control conditions, and I'm happy to post the paper. But just to give you one example, it would be I have a bucket of grapes and I take a grape and I look at you and I eat the grape. Versus I take a grape and I hold it out to give to you, but I drop it and it falls behind the desk and I can't reach it, and I'm trying to reach it to give to you, but I can't reach it. And so sort of well-intentioned but clumsy versus malintentioned individuals. And what they found, there are a number of different measures. I just pulled out one graph from the study. Is if you look at how patient they are, how long they take before they give up and go away. They're more patient with clumsy experimenters than they are with mean ones. So despite the fact that the sort of surface level actions are fairly similar, I know in the examples I gave, they're not. I promise you, they are in the study. The surface level actions are fairly similar. How much the experimenter is looking at the chimpanzee or not is fairly similar. The amount of time they're interacting with the object is fairly similar. But nevertheless, the chimpanzees are making a distinction between are you failing to give it to me because you're refusing to or because you are unable to? And so this, is something that humans do. It's something that at least some other animals can do. Something I've been very curious about with Bonnie. And so I'm often like, I understand what you want. I am acknowledging your request, but I am refusing it. I don't think it makes a difference to her, but it makes me feel better. Okay, so I just want to walk through, or to make sure that everyone is on the same page with theory of mind. Does everyone, is that like a familiar concept? I mean, it's very common in psychology. I don't want to like walk through it. Is there anyone who has like not familiar with great, awesome, I'm gonna do it. So, because I think that it's something that, is very common in psychology and cognitive science, and it's something that is becoming increasingly talked about in AI models of behavior, and certainly something that some people have claimed that LLMs can do. I don't think they can, but I want you to sort of understand where this comes from. So this is the classic quote-unquote Sally Ann task, such because in the original study there are two puppets named Sally and Ann. So this is the task. This is Sally, this is Ann. Sally has a ball, she puts it into her basket. She then goes for a walk. Ann comes and takes the ball out of the basket. She puts the ball in the box, and then Sally comes back, and she wants to play with her ball. Where will she look for the ball? And so in the classic version of the task, it's verbal. You ask the child, where is she going to look for the ball? And in this task, children will pass at around 4 years old. They'll say, before 4 years old, they'll say, Sally's going to look in the box because that's where the ball is, right? The child knows the ball's in the box, and so they say, well, the ball's in the box. After around 4, children will start to say, she'll look in the basket because that's the last place Sally saw it, right? And so this is called a false belief task, and it's about understanding that someone else can have a belief about the world that is incorrect and a belief about the world that is different from the one you have. So if you've ever been around, a preschooler where they're telling stories, about what happened at preschool or their friend or whatever, sometimes they just jump in and they have no theory of mind. And they're like, and then he wouldn't let me wear the hat. And you're like, who is he? And I have no idea what you're talking about, right? But it's like, they don't sort of understand that they have information that you don't. So that is the classic version of the task. And for a number of years, people really thought that there was this kind of big change at 4 years old, the pre-theory of mind, post-theory of mind. And but subsequent studies have really criticized this because it's very verbal, and it uses puppets or abstract drawings, and children have no reason to care, right? It's like, I don't care where Sally looks, it's her ball, I'm not getting it, I'm not invested in this question. And so if you change any of those things, children will pass it much, much younger. So if you give them more engaging paradigms where you're acting things out in front of them, if you use familiar characters, so instead of Sally and Ann, if you use characters from a cartoon show they watch, or if you use individuals in their own family, including family pets, they'll do much better on the task. And if you use nonverbal methods, so you can use eye tracking to see, Sally comes back in, and then just like in the sort of hand-reaching experiment, right? Sally comes in, and then you look to see where does the child predict that Sally's going to move. This eye tracking paradigm has been used in great apes as well. We just did a study with eye tracking in great apes, kind of based on these models, which also find that great apes can predict false belief when you're using a nonverbal method. There's some beautiful studies looking at facial expressions where 2-year-old children will pass this task, where you have Cookie Monster. Cookie Monster hides his cookies. He then leaves. A bad guy comes in and replaces the cookies with spiders. And then Cookie Monster comes in and is like, oh boy, I'm really excited about my cookies. Sorry, I can't do his voice. And Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Right, Cookie Monster comes in, he's excited about his cookies, and he like goes to approach the thing, and 2-year-old children will go, ah, if Cookie Monster doesn't know that the spiders are there. If Cookie Monster knows the spiders are there, the 2-year-olds just sit there, right? But they get really excited because Cookie Monster is gonna freak the F out when he sees the spiders. So that's actually the paradigm that we're using now with eye tracking in apes to see whether apes anticipate others' surprise as sort of another measure. So point here is that this sort of false belief task was sort of seen as like the gold standard for theory of mind, but that whole field has really been broken apart into different kinds of modules, predicting where others, what others can see and not see, predicting others' intentions, predicting others' goals, predicting others' belief about the world, predicting when others will act on information that they and another individual share. So there are all kinds of perturbations and potentially different abilities that are all related to and sort of load into this idea of theory of mind. Okay. So apes can also pass that. I am going to, hold on really quickly, see where I am. All right, I have like too many more slides. It's fine. I'm gonna do a couple of things really quickly, and then I will, can we end 2 minutes late? Yes. Because we start, okay, great. So I want to talk about knowing what you know. Think about this as thinking about thinking. There's a whole body of work on what's so-called metacognition. And I'm just going to give you one task that I think nicely illustrates this. Again, not mine. This is a Hampton study from PNAS 2001. So in this study, they had rhesus macaques, and they showed them an image. Right? So here, a little picture of a rooster, and then they have to wait for some amount of time. Then they have a choice. And in this choice phase, they either are given no choice, so it's just, right, so that would be the no choice phase. So these are two different conditions. So in one case, they see this, there's a delay, this image comes up, they have to touch it, and then they get a memory task, right? So which image did I show you? Or which image did you see? And if they're correct, they get a peanut. In the other condition, they have a choice between, do you want to play the memory game, or do you want to opt out of the memory game and get something but a shittier reward? And, right, so if you, and I think this is a nice task that has been, variations of this have been used across animals and for different types of memory tasks. Basically, it's a confidence judgment, right? So if the way it should work, if you're a human, is do I think I remember the thing? Do I think I would be able to answer a question about it? If so, I should gamble and try it because I'm going to get a better reward. If not, then at least I should opt out, but at least I get something. And so this is monkey 1 and monkey 2. So they didn't do it a huge number. It took a lot of training. But what they found is that in the task where they were given a choice, they were better at the task. Right, and so this is just showing proportion correct when they get to the memory task. If they are allowed to choose whether they want to play or not, their performance is improved. So they're in essence, they are aware of their own level of knowledge about that thing. There are other kinds of tasks. So this is called an opt-out task. There are other kinds of measures that you can use to assess metacognition. So you can look at sort of how long you wait to search for a reward. You can look at animals' search strategies for selectively sampling the environment and looking for new knowledge based on what they think they already know. So there's a whole really interesting body of work about this. And then I already talked about this, so I won't go through it, just to say that scrub jays that have stolen from others in the past will, this is just showing their recaching. So these are experienced birds. Experience just means, are you a thief? So, right, so you're more likely to hide food when someone has watched, or to re-hide food when someone has watched you hiding it, if you have stolen from someone else in the past. Okay, so I think these are some questions I would like to raise, and then I want to end by showing you one of my current studies, which I think integrates expectations about others' minds into play. Okay, so I'm just going to skip to this because I'm running out of time. So one of the things that I think is really exciting about biological agents is that they have the ability to set their own goals. You can see this in play. You can see this in trade-offs between exploration and exploitation. You can see this in games. You can see this in people trying to see how many things they can stack on their cats. Animals also do this, right? They also set arbitrary goals for themselves and seem to have fun. And I think that this is an area, this idea of doing something, exploring your environment because it's interesting, because it's internally rewarding, is something that is underappreciated, historically underappreciated in studies of animal cognition. And I think it's very relevant for questions about machine learning. So, what is the importance of play? What is the importance of affect? What is the importance of internal motivation to explore and engage with the world in creative ways that don't immediately get you food or mates or shelter, but get you fun, right? So what's up with fun? I'm just going to end by just showing you one thing and end with a video. So we have been looking at play as a way to learn about and practice your projections of others' responses. So play is a way to learn about social interactions with others. So in humans, human infants start joking around non-verbally around the first year of life. There's this nice little trichotomy of things that Vasu Reddy and colleagues sort of defined. So offering something and pulling it back, doing, I think this is the best term ever, provocative non-compliance. So I know you want me to not do something, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So I'm gonna look at you and I'm gonna slowly do it, right? I'm not supposed to touch the stove, and the child goes up and is like, right? Or taking something that is, a violation of a norm. So putting a shoe on your head as a hat. And then disrupting others' activities. So these are things that children will do, basically to get a rise out of other people, but they only do it to get a rise out of them if the rise is not extremely negative. So sort of pushing that boundary. How far can I push this other individual? Trying to sort of provoke and test your social models. Basically, it's a way of rehearsing. I mean, that would be my argument. And so we've looked at this in great apes. So this is just orangutans here. One is extending and pulling back a piece of bamboo to the other one, and sort of extending it, waving it around, and as she reaches for it, pulls it back at the last second. And this is a pretty, you can see apes playing games like this at zoos. So they play these very simple kinds of jokes. I think about them as a possibly a game, possibly a joke, because it involves sort of a normative setup and then a violation of expectation, right? And I think that in order to playfully tease, you have to have an appreciation for that moment of expectation violation, which is a very sort of human cognitive thing. So I just want to show you in the last minute, I'm going to show you just a couple of examples of apes teasing each other that I think hopefully will give you some interesting ideas. Hopefully will look pretty familiar. So this is a juvenile chimpanzee here, and importantly, he's repeating his behavior and he's looking over to see how she responds.
So cute.
The turn.
Let's see if I can. So he keeps checking. This one just has a single action, but it's quite surprising because it comes from the back. So we use surprise as one of our measures. So a lot of like coming up behind and going, ha! I love this. This is a juvenile orangutan. This is her dad down there being very stoic. You know, she's doing something. So what we described it, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we define playful teasing? And we decided that sort of the best definition we could come up with was that it was a provocative but benign behavior. And it was provocative in that it became increasingly hard to ignore as the behavior progressed. So, yeah, so then she swings down and finally jumps on him. And okay, anyway, we'll just stop. So I just wanted to kind of throw those out there as things that I think, hopefully over the course of these tutorials have moved from things that are more externally explainable to things that I, at least would argue, require some kind of internal model of the world, of others, and different ways of selectively sampling the environment. And I think that all of these sort of present interesting opportunities for formalism and for thinking about what kind of information an animal needs to have in order to succeed at these kinds of tasks. So thank you so much. I'm really looking forward